We begin with the latest on the coronavirus outbreak. As of this morning, the total number of deaths in China surpassed the 1,500 mark, with the number of confirmed infections now exceeding 66,000.
When it comes to symptoms, the flu and coronavirus are similar. Fever, cough, headaches, nasal congestion, and vomiting. But this coronavirus also commonly comes with a shortness of breath and pneumonia symptoms, which are serious.
The usual cause of death is basically lung failure. So people just aren't able to oxygenate their blood well enough. And they can get a so-called, basically they go into almost like a shock type state.
That may explain why the hospitalization rate for the coronavirus in China is so high, about 16%, while in Canada, the rate for the flu this season is 7%. In both cases, people with mild symptoms aren't always counted, so these rates might actually be lower. Some don't even know they've been infected.
Specifically, I don't have any symptoms. I would have never known had I not been randomly chosen.
The coronavirus has a higher death rate. In China, there have been 29 deaths for every 1,000 confirmed cases. In Canada, complications from the flu this season have killed just 2 out of every 1,000 people diagnosed.
What we're seeing right now with the COVID-19 is it appears as though a lot of people have mild infections, and so they recover quite quickly and quite well from the infection. But there are a smaller proportion of people who are getting severely ill.
The flu and coronavirus can vary when it comes to how contagious they are. With the H1N1 flu, the transmission rate is 1.3, or one infected person typically infects 1.3 people. For this coronavirus, it's almost double. A recent study put it as high as 2.2, higher than SARS, which was 2. When it comes to prevention, flu shots reduce the risk of illness depending on the flu strain, but there are no vaccines for coronaviruses.
Basic hand hygiene and limiting your exposure to coughing and sneezing are still the best ways to protect yourself in either case. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
It's not easy to pinpoint the person who triggered an outbreak while it's spreading around the world. China is being accused of mishandling and suppressing information, but some scientists argue it has acted quickly to stop the spread of this virus right from the beginning.
So each dot here is a infection.
Trevor Bedford is a genetic detective. He's figured out when the first patient was likely infected.
The most likely scenario is that there was some initial phase at which there are animals in this market that are infected by novel coronavirus, and there's exposures that are happening at that point, and people are getting sick, but then around this November 15th to December 15th timeframe, one of those events kind of catches.
Bedford is tracking the virus's genetic code. It changes slightly when the virus passes from person to person. The data is so detailed, it traces right back to when patient 0 became sick.
And then starts this kind of epidemic fire in which one person's infecting another person, and then that has since grown to be this large epidemic that we see today.
Scientists calculate each person infected with the virus is infecting about 2 to 3 others. At times, this outbreak was doubling in size every 6 days. That large epidemic is happening in Hubei, China. The capital, Wuhan, is a bustling city of 11 million people. The first public sign that something was wrong came on December 30th. Local physicians, including Dr. Li, warned people in group chats about a SARS-like virus in the city. The next day, Wuhan's health commission told the WHO it had 27 pneumonia cases from an unknown cause. Then, New Year's Day, authorities shut down the Wuhan seafood market, believing it could be the source of the mysterious virus. A week later, China said they're dealing with a new strain of coronavirus and 41 people are sick. Within days, Chinese scientists unraveled the virus's genetic code, allowing countries to develop tests and track it right around the world. Following those reports, journalist Sean Lee traveled to Wuhan to find out what was happening on the ground.
Up until late January, local authorities were saying it's really not that bad. There's no reason to worry. It's not that serious. So it wasn't even, I think, even a lack of information so much as there was some misinformation as well in the beginning.
January 20th was pivotal. China declared the virus was spreading from person to person, and health workers were sick. To contain the spread, authorities placed an unprecedented quarantine on the people of Wuhan, followed by the rest of Hubei province. An underreaction, followed by a massive overreaction.
People are starting to drop on the floor.
Countless headlines and social media posts have been arguing China was covering up cases and the outbreak could have been stopped sooner.
So I think it's dreaming in Technicolor to think that we could have detected this earlier.
Infectious disease specialist Alison McGeer was on the front lines during the SARS outbreak in Toronto in 2002. China was widely criticized then for not telling the world about the virus for months. But McGeer and other experts say they're extracting information from the virus itself and credit China with finding and identifying it so quickly.
We're talking a maximum of a week between when those physicians were raising the alarm bells and when China declared the outbreak to the World Health Organization. That's still really short. It's not enough time to have made a difference in the evolution of the outbreak.
On January 25th, Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations were canceled. There were nearly 1,300 confirmed cases, 41 deaths, and 23 people outside China were infected in 9 countries, including Canada. In just over 3 weeks, China had gone from identifying a virus no one had ever heard of to the unprecedented quarantine of 50 million people in order to stop the spread.
People have done an amazingly good job at trying to contain this, and if we have failed globally to contain it, you can't look at China and say, oh, you could have done better. Of course they could have done better.
At this point in the outbreak, many scientists do seem to agree on one point. Given global travel, this virus won't likely be contained, and the world is at the beginning of a mild pandemic. The last time a mild virus made its way around the world was in 2009. H1N1 ended up claiming about as many lives as the annual flu virus. But scientists say COVID-19 may be a little more severe. But China's lockdowns could change this equation. The lockdowns do appear to have slowed the spread of COVID-19 cases around the world. However, doctors in this country are being told the virus may be too late to take hold in this flu season, but they should be actively looking for it when cold and flu season starts again in November. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
مصر لا ما تقدرش عشوائيات كتير في مصر وأماكن مزدحمة كتير ومفيش اهتمام بالكلام ده.
A special quarantine facility has been established to accommodate all Egyptians coming back from Wuhan. They will be quarantined for 14 days. And Egypt has dedicated 140 healthcare experts to look after them during these 2 weeks.
Japan and the growing desperation on board a cruise ship where coronavirus cases are growing. Dozens of new cases confirmed today, and now word that hundreds of American passengers trapped on board are about to be rescued. The U.S. government set to airlift passengers directly from that ship right into another round of quarantine here at home. This is the first fatality from that sickness is confirmed in Europe. ABC's Maggie Rulli has the latest from Japan.
Tonight, the race to escape this quarantine cruise ship is on. A plane to take the nearly 400 Americans back to the U.S. is landing today, but many are concerned that they'll have to spend an additional 14 days in quarantine on a U.S. military base.
Tensions are running pretty high. After the announcement was made,
Princess Cruises confirming 67 new cases of the new coronavirus on board, including 5 Americans, bringing the total infections on the ship to at least 285. The CDC says American passengers will have to go through additional screening before they can come to the U.S.
The fact that more and more positive tests keep coming has made us lose a little bit of faith in this quarantine process.
There's more than an estimated 68,000 cases worldwide, and at least 1,600 people are confirmed to have died from the virus, mostly in mainland China. In France, the first person outside of Asia has died. Officials saying an 80-year-old Chinese tourist had been in isolation since late January. The CDC says the risk to Americans is still low. The U.S. announcing it will now be testing for COVID-19 in 5 major cities in cases where flu tests were negative: in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York.
This is part of the multi-layered public health approach so that we have an early warning system in the event that the virus is spreading.
Health officials in Hawaii are on high alert after a Japanese man tested positive for the virus after spending nearly a week on the island of Oahu. And tonight, we're getting a look inside this 3M factory in South Dakota, working around the clock making face masks and respirators to combat the global shortages of supplies. Passengers say they were told to get ready to leave as soon as tonight, but they tell us they still don't know exactly how this evacuation is even going to work. And Tom, it seems like day after day, the mood on this boat is filled with more fear and frustration.
Fatuma is burning her own clothes to try and keep family members warm. They recently arrived in this freezing makeshift camp in the town of Atma in Idlib province.
We fled our homes in Aleppo. We couldn't live anymore under constant bombardment and airstrikes. We saw children dying in front of us. We came here. It's tough. I'm sick, I have leukemia, and the smoke from the heater is suffocating.
Fatuma and her family are just some of the many war refugees suffering cold, overcrowding, and fear of what might happen next. In the last 4 days alone, around 150,000 Syrians fled their villages as government forces closed in to capture rebel-held Idlib. The military campaign that started in April has seen more than 1 million refugees stranded on the border with Turkey. They are feeling increasingly betrayed and abandoned by the world. Aisha has 10 children, but only 2 live with her. The others are dispersed across Idlib province.
It's very cold. I have no place to serve my kids' meals. There's no furniture. Snow is everywhere. I'm hopeless and there's nothing I can do. I pray God will help us.
As the humanitarian crisis deepens, aid agencies are overwhelmed with growing demands for tents, blankets, stoves, warm clothes and food. The internally displaced have often been forced to move many times over the last few months, and each time they were hoping this would be their last, that they would finally settle and start a new life. But the 9-year war grinds on, and the rebels are losing ground, and for almost 4 million people in Idlib and on the outskirts of Aleppo, it's probably just a matter of time before they pack and run away, seeking another shelter in a safe area. But there may be no more safe areas in Idlib province. Government troops and their Russian allies are determined to defeat the opposition. Civilians who are trapped may have little option but return to government-held territory. But fearing retaliation, many prefer to stay near the border with Turkey, hoping tomorrow might be a better day. Hashim Harbara, Al Jazeera, Hatay, on Turkey's border with Syria.
The fire broke out on Thursday evening, quickly spreading through the unlicensed orphanage run by a US religious group just outside Haiti's capital. Authorities say 7 of those who perished were babies or toddlers, along with 6 who were roughly 10 or 11 years of age. It reportedly took firefighters around an hour and a half to reach the scene.
We did not have the means to intervene all the way up the floor. We were taking out the children who were conscious and making sure to get them to the hospital. Unfortunately, when they got to the hospital, they did not receive any help.
How the blaze started is still being investigated, but a worker at the home said candles were being used for light after a generator failed. The Church of Bible Understanding is reported to have failed sanitary inspections in the past because of overcrowding and a lack of trained staff. Pennsylvania organization which runs this and another home in Haiti says it houses close to 200 children in what it calls a Christian training program. In Haiti, orphans are often children that families can't afford to feed. They come to places like this to get an education and safe housing. Workers from the home are in shock.
I was eating soup and I ran fast to get there. When I arrived, I did not find any of my children. I saw only 3 or 4 of the younger ones alive.
The government has closed around 160 orphanages in the past 5 years, and hundreds more operate without official authorization. Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse tweeted his condolences saying, "I'm deeply saddened by the death of about 10 children as a result of a fire last night at the orphanage. I urge the authorities to urgently investigate in order to establish the causes of this tragedy." The authorities say they're seeking shelter for the children that survived. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera.
This is the moment another Syrian military helicopter shot down in Aleppo province. None of its crew survived. They were taking part in a military operation to recapture opposition-held areas on the outskirts of Aleppo city. It's the second helicopter downed by rebels in the same area this week. Fierce fighting continues in neighboring Idlib province. It's a critical time for the rebels, who are constantly retreating after losing ground. Idlib is their last stronghold. If they are defeated here, the war will be over. Many Syrians are continuing to flee their homes. This woman has been forced from the countryside of Aleppo province. She feels abandoned by everyone.
It's very cold and no one seems to care about what's happening to us. The situation is more than tragic. No one is helping look at the people leaving. I don't know of any safe area where I can take my family.
Almost 150,000 refugees have fled towards the border with Turkey in the last 4 days, joining more than 1 million forced from their homes since the start of the Syrian army's offensive in Idlib last April. Ahmed Miglaj has been forced to flee his village of Jabal al-Zawiya, as well as refugee camps at least 4 times over the last few months.
I recently moved with my family to the city of Binish thinking it would be safe and far from the fighting. Then the Syrian army stepped up its offensive a week ago. We packed and left. I don't know where to go next. I feel like my next move will be towards the unknown.
As the humanitarian crisis deepens, Turkey is deploying more troops into Idlib. Ankara accuses Damascus of violating the terms of a ceasefire agreement that was reached 2 years ago between Turkey, Iran and Russia. The deal established safe zones and implemented a ceasefire, but violence never stopped. The Syrian army seems determined to defeat the rebels and continue its advance towards the city of Idlib. That's a red line for Turkey. It's ramped up its military presence in Idlib and has given the Syrian army until the end of this month to pull out behind Turkish observation posts or face a tougher response. Hashim Ahbara, Al Jazeera, Cilvigizu on Turkey's border with Syria.
This is the moment Yemen's Houthi rebels say they shot down a Saudi Air Force fighter jet. The rebels aired this video on Saturday. The Saudi UAE-led coalition confirmed one of its planes went down in Al Juaf Governorate in the country's northeast. The Houthis also broadcast vision of what it says is the aftermath. Saudi-led airstrikes in the area followed, which the rebels claim were retaliatory attacks. The Saudi coalition released a statement saying there was a possibility of what it calls collateral damage to civilians.
This show you that the Sana'a forces has been now able, after they have shut down several of Saudi or American drones over the sky of Yemen in the last 3 months. Now it seems to be that they are able to shoot down those fighter jets, and I can say that if they start this stage, this means that we're going to enter a new stage of the war.
The Houthis claim the plane was downed with an advanced air-to-ground missile. Some analysts say if that's true, it would be a very significant development in Yemen's long-running war.
This is a big deal, knowing that already their partners, the Yemenis, the Emiratis, have for all practical purposes withdrawn, left, And now the Saudis are there and incapable of finishing the war, and certainly incapable of winning the war. And now, perhaps with this game changer, beginning to lose the war.
The conflict in Yemen has killed tens of thousands of people and brought millions to the brink of famine. It's estimated more than 91,000 Yemenis have been killed and another 3 million displaced by the fighting. There's no sign yet when it will end. Nicola Gage, Al Jazeera.
A patrol by Congolese soldiers and UN peacekeepers in the Beni region, and no one to be seen in several villages. People say they're facing unprecedented attacks by the Allied Democratic Forces. The ADF originated in western Uganda in the 1990s to fight for the creation of an Islamic state. Their rebellion was crushed by Ugandan forces. ADF fighters then crossed the border into the neighboring DRC, where they've remained for nearly 20 years. Human rights campaigners in Beni say more than 400 Congolese have been killed in the last 1 month alone. Hundreds have fled their homes.
There's no one here because of the attack that happened last week. People are afraid to come back. Only soldiers are patrolling.
Security forces have increased patrols in remote areas where the attacks have been happening. 64 people were killed in this village of Mamove last week. The attacks are happening at the same time as a government offensive against the ADF. Security forces say since their campaign started last October, they've killed dozens of ADF fighters, including top commanders. They say other fighters have been captured and their bases destroyed.
We must defeat ADF. They are terrorists. We call upon all people of DRC to support us so we can neutralize the enemy and help civilians return to their homes.
Thousands in Beni protested against the UN force known as MONUSCO last year, accusing peacekeepers of not doing enough to protect them. A UN base was burned down and peacekeeping operations in the city were paralyzed for nearly 2 weeks. MONUSCO commanders say troops are now working even more closely with Congolese soldiers to target the ADF.
Since the November crisis, we have enhanced our activities unilaterally, ourselves in the jungle doing the patrols, but also with the FRDC. Our support to the FRDC continues on many different levels. We provide them with logistical support.
With continuing violence, it's increasingly dangerous for health workers to reach people possibly affected by the Ebola virus. Beni is the epicenter of the latest outbreak in the DRC. It's also where many of the rebel attacks have happened recently, making it even more difficult for Ebola responders to do their jobs safely. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.
This gift is more than just a stuffed bear.
Aww.
It's a piece of this dad's late son. 16-year-old Dakota Reed died in a car accident last year. His father, John, made the decision to donate his organs to give others a second chance at life.
Every night, I would stand beside Dakota's bed and I'd lay my head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat. And I did it all the way up to the last night, and I felt like, God put it on my heart to do this.
6 of Dakota's organs were donated, and the man who got his heart sent John this special gift. A bear proclaiming him the best dad ever. It also had a recording of Dakota's heart beating inside its recipient. John was overcome with emotion after hearing it.
What that does is give me what I've been missing. It gave me a piece of my thumb back. And so now I can lay in bed and listen to it.
John says he hopes his son's story encourages others to consider organ donation. He says hearing from the people Dakota saved has given him and his family a sense of peace.
I couldn't ask for a better way to console my grief than to know that he lived on to others, and he's a hero. He gave the gift of life, and no doubt, I'm happy with it.